Hello, my name is Dr. Reed Tuckson, former Commissioner of Public Health for the District of Columbia and a member of the steering committee of the Black Coalition Against COVID. I have the honor of being your host for this hour-long program called Youth Voices and COVID-19, during which my distinguished panel of child psychologists and pediatricians will join us in listening to the voices of our children and provide some insights on how they and we as parents and adults can help them navigate through this challenging time. This program was inspired by a film and associated outreach initiatives conducted by Arena Stage, which they call Inside Voices, a film by Arena Stage's Voices of Now ensembles. It was designed to reveal and address, through the inspiring creativity of young actors, what is happening to children throughout the DMV region and how they are reacting to today's challenges. We at the Black Coalition Against COVID, as have our colleagues at Arena Stage, the Went Center, and members of the Washington Teachers Union, have been listening attentively during this pandemic to many young voices expressing anxieties, grief, isolation, and other emotions that are being experienced by so many of our children. We were inspired to come together to present this program, produced as always with excellence and caring by our friends at WHUR 96.3 FM radio and WHUT Howard University Television, which we hope will offer some healing and some optimism for children and their families. And it is our intent that this program provide a catalyst for discussion and insight-driven action to help give our children their childhoods back. I'm joined by Stephanie Handel, a grief and trauma psychotherapist and director of programs for recover and grief camps of the Went Center, by Dr. Yolandra Hancock, pediatrician, health and wellness practitioner, and medical director of CRC Health and Wellness, and by Dr. Tyish Hall Brown, child and adolescent psychiatrist, director of the school-based behavioral health program at the Howard University College of Medicine. Each of them will react to and provide commentary about excerpts from the original film that addresses the topics of isolation, anxiety, and grief. The program will also feature short film reactions from other students who had the opportunity to review the full film, which we will show you how to access at the end of the program. And now, let's get started.
When I was 15, the world fell apart. A virus swept over nations and swallowed cities, emptying the streets of even the most populated metropolises. Doors were locked and shutters closed. Masks clamped over the faces that peered through windows. 6 feet of distance separated the world. I first heard about it on social media.
I first heard it on The Daily Show.
I heard about it on the news. They said it was spreading to Europe, and they weren't ready. I wondered if we would have the same problem if it came to America.
I heard it was just like the flu, but people seemed so scared, and I remember thinking, this is just like the flu, then why is this such a big deal? Am I missing something?
I noticed that as the coronavirus was popping up across the country, I rarely heard the adults around me mention it. Even as schools were closing, teachers didn't want to say the word coronavirus because they didn't want to worry us or disrupt our routine. Then one day, my mom bought cleaning supplies and hand sanitizer and said that if the virus became an issue, we would be ready. After that, we never talked about it again. I think sometimes grown-ups aren't sure how much information is safe to share with young people. Because adults didn't discuss the virus with me at home or at school, I was left with a lot of stress and uncertainty.
When it finally came, would it have been easier if adults had been talking to us about it all along?
Which is more beneficial for young people?
maintaining our routine as long as possible, or being in the loop.
Our teachers might not have been talking about it as much, but the kids were.
Coronavirus started when people ate a soup made of bats.
It was engineered in a lab as a bioweapon.
I heard it spreads through 5G towers.
We can't get it.
Unless you eat Chinese food.
What is the impact of having false information, or not having enough information to begin with?
Well, Dr. Hancock, you can maybe help us get started with this question of what is the impact of having false information or not enough, as we adults have had a conversation with the President of the United States where he suggests that maybe it isn't good to give even adults information because that will lead to panic. How do we translate that into appropriate behavior with our children?
Right. The unfortunate step when we do not provide our children with sufficient information is that we leave them to their own imaginations and conversations within their peer circles. And those conversations are reflective of mistruths and really fueled by fear. And one of the things that I really encourage parents to do in the midst of this pandemic, and really with any life crisis, is to be fully transparent from a developmentally appropriate way in including children in the conversations. And this goes for a pandemic, this goes for any life stress, divorce, any of those things, so that children can be kept in the loop. You can maintain a routine for children while they are informed of what's going on.
I think this challenge that you mentioned, though, about age appropriate, and Dr. Hall Brown, I wonder how you think about how do we begin to titrate just how much information to give at a child at a particular age versus too much?
Absolutely. I think that we know parents know their children well, right? As a professional, I can say, from this age to this age might be a good idea, but really it's about knowing your children and having those conversations to see how much you feel like they're capable of handling. So having the news on constantly, having them, available, or having them connected to devices where they're getting information might not be appropriate for a younger child. And even teens, it could be difficult for them to process the information. So we have to think about, if I'm dealing with a 6-year-old and I know my 6-year-old, they may want to know what's going on, but they may not need all the details. And they may need me to have this conversation with them in a way that is not threatening, but that at least lets them know that this is what's happening in the world, and then to get feedback from them about how they feel about it or what they're thinking about it. And then as I get older, go into the older age ranges, the teens, we might be thinking, okay, let's sit down and watch the news together and then have a conversation about that.
I want you to take that a little further. So I think that what I sort of hear you saying is that it's not just one conversation, it's many conversations, and it occurs over time, so that you begin at one place and then you continue to listen and dialogue, assess how your child is feeling, and then move on to the next level. Is that the essence of the point?
Absolutely. I think that having conversations daily would be helpful. I mean, I often recommend to my families to pick a time where they can have where they feel like they're in a safe space to have these difficult conversations. So it may be after dinner, maybe during dinner, it may be a time on the weekends, but checking in with your children often is important because, again, their emotions are going to change, as well as the information that we know about this, this pandemic. It changes daily. And so being able to stay on top of that and have these conversations with them more often than not, I think it's helpful for both the parent and for the child.
Great. And let me make sure, Stephanie Handel, that I understand you deal with a lot of emotions in young people through your work at the WIN Center. It might seem obvious, but let me make sure. How concerning do we need to be about children being anxious? Is that not a part of growing up?
I think it's a reality that we need to be aware of, that kids hold stress. Kids experience the stress also of the adults around them, and anxiety can actually get in the way of their just everyday functioning. And so whatever we can do as adults to have some of the difficult conversations, to validate emotions, sometimes even help them name what is happening in their body, really helping, you know, kids from the time they're young all the way up through our adolescence. Like, notice what's happening in your body, because as they learn to hear their body and we help them understand that what happens when we start to feel stress or anxiety, we can then also help explore tools that can help them decrease some of that stress. Anxiety is real, and we want kids to feel more in control as opposed to being out of control.
Let me pursue that. I think this is a very important point, and I know for many parents, you know, we struggle with this issue of either giving our children permission to feel the way they feel, and acknowledge that that is, in fact, in a challenging time, it may be okay to be a little anxious. Or should we be basically asking our children, even as they observe their own bodies, their own reaction, toughen up? You know, come on, you know, cowboy up. Don't be a wimp. How do you sort of balance out when we're, you know, whether or not we're worried about turning our children into weaklings and crybabies, which you hear a lot of parents concerned about, versus acknowledging honestly that it's okay sometimes to feel not good?
Well, I think what you speak to also is sort of so many stereotypes that we might have either around gender, around culture, what we're taught in our families of origin. And, you know, to cowboy it up, using your language, I think of that just sort of like pressing down, pushing away. And the reality is that when we push down or push away, our body holds and stores those emotions, those experiences. So you might cowboy up now and appear really strong, but then it will show itself in some way at some point. And that anxiety or that sadness or that worry or even anger that we might not have felt comfortable giving permission at the time to our young people might show itself later on in ways of being really fidgety, in having nightmares, bad dreams, intrusive thoughts, you know, just feeling like I can't hold my body because there's so much in it. And so I think that as adults, as we try and find our way and navigate our own emotions in this time, giving permission and just engaging in these difficult conversations around feelings and difficult events, COVID, is really important. And it then increases our ongoing communication and trust with our young people as we look towards the future with them as well.
That's terrific. Well, we're going to turn for a moment to another video segment. In addition to having this wonderful film that Arena Stage has produced for us, we asked school students around the DMV area to view the film and then make their own video, a short segment that amplify some of the points that they felt were important. Let's turn to one of those now.
As a student in a remote environment, I feel physically safe. The risk of me getting COVID or any other virus has decreased by so much because my largest interaction in school is online. However, I am noticing a lack of mental and emotional safety. My bedroom is my office, where I'm constantly isolated. I'm also at a new school where, due to the screen barrier, creating friendships and asking for help is very difficult. Additionally, the only rule around screen time is each class gets 100 minutes of Zoom for a week, leaving me uncertain of each day's structure. Despite my school's effort, the adjustment to this new environment cannot be considered safe.
So, although that was a little, you know, technically rough, we felt that that film was so important, and that the comments made by that young lady were just so powerful, Dr. Hancock. And I sort of wonder how you react when a student talks about the sense of whether or not they are in an emotionally safe place.
No, absolutely. I can certainly identify with her as the mother of a daughter who just started at a new school in a virtual space. My daughter's concerns about isolation, establishment of relationship, speak to what this young lady talks about, the fact that we are in our students' bedrooms, where it may not necessarily be a safe space. They may not want folks in their bedrooms. And when you think about issues of safety related to classmates and the interaction there, How safe will the chat space be for students when a teacher has to make a choice between communicating with her students or blocking bullying because of what may be happening virtually? It limits the ability to establish relationship in an otherwise relationship building setting. When you think of school, you think about establishing those interpersonal connections. The socialization of children is critical for their development. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that social development is impacted by COVID and how much more our children will need the services of the phenomenal panelists you have here today.
Dr. Hall-Brown, as we think about the honesty with which this young woman presented her feelings, and again, she voluntarily said, I want to say these things. Should parents have their own anxiety about children bringing their anxiety to them? I think earlier you made a point that has stayed with me, and that is the sense that sometimes we transfer our anxieties onto our children. In this case, our children are bringing their anxieties to us. How do we learn to be prepared to handle that?
That can be scary as a parent. I mean, I think this young lady really spoke from the heart, and it touches you. I think we all, can sympathize with her. As a parent, as a professional, I think that the more we have these conversations, the more comfortable we become with them. And yes, there is a chance that we transfer our anxieties or our worries to our children, but I think that is why we have the conversations and why we get into kind of how they're feeling and then expressing how we're feeling. So part of all this as well is modeling. So letting them know that it's okay to be anxious. This is a challenging time for all of us. It is okay. But then how do we get over that? Or how do we then overcome, our feelings of anxiety, or how do we cope with them? And so I think, that, again, the discussions that we have with them may have a tinge of our own anxiety attached to it, but that's okay. I think, again, the children will understand and will respect the fact that their parents are anxious, and then be able to use that as a way of coping on their own.
Thank you. And Stephanie Handel, help me to think about some of the tools. We have just about a minute more for this section, but tell me about some of the tools or the ways in which you help young people deal with these uncomfortable emotions like anxiety.
So in switching over to obviously Zoom sessions and working with my clients via computer where I don't have access to some of the same things, I'm really teaching about body awareness, about listening to how our body is telling us things, whether that's a tightness in the stomach, a tightness in the chest, a jittering. So an increase in awareness. I am teaching a movement with body, anything from literally shaking hands into moving shoulders back, being able to learn a mindful breathing, which might be incredibly foreign to some people, or it might be like, well, I always breathe. Now let's learn a breathing, which actually you feel much more in control of, where it doesn't have to be really dramatic, but you are just regulating yourself so that you can feel much more in control. I'm also integrating a lot more of drawing, where young people can project either through writing and drawing what they're experiencing inside. So it doesn't always have to be finding the words to talk about something that is incredibly overwhelming and confusing. Well, let's find other ways to express yourself and be able to find a comfort, again, that you can feel most in control, and you can bring some of that anxiety from up here even down a little bit. So we're increasing capacity, decreasing anxiety to feel much more in control.
Outstanding tools. And they don't cost money, and they're easy to do, and they're readily available. Well, we're going to transition now to another set of important issues. We're going to look at the issue that young people are tragically feeling too much of, and that's the emotion of grief.
It's just upsetting to be a senior in this quarantine. At the same time, I feel like I'm not really allowed to be upset about it because, I mean, there's a pandemic going on and it could be so much worse. Like, particularly for me, I know there are people dying and sick, and people who can't see their loved ones. I wanted to see all my friends next to me. And now I won't, which sucks. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I had just come home to Columbia, South Carolina from Howard University in Washington, D.C. After packing up my dorm room alone and traveling through airports alone, all I wanted was to not be alone. I was excited to see my family I had not seen since last November. I wanted to be with my family. I knew social distancing was the logical thing to do based on CDC guidelines, but the reality did not hit me until it was time for my grandmother's funeral the day after I got home. My parents passed me my mask and gloves as we were getting into the car. I put them on. Then, they told me that the whole family thought it was best if I sat alone in the back of the church because I had just returned from a city that had a much higher rate of COVID-19 cases. So I sat in the corner, alone, the entire funeral. It hurt. I felt like a germ. I had to walk alone to see my grandmother's open casket. I could not hug anyone. I could not be comforted, nor could I give comfort. At that moment, I did not care about this vicious virus. I just wanted to be a part of my family. And I had 14 days of self-isolation left before I could even be face-to-face with my own parents living in the same home as me.
When my dad died, I thought that everything was over. My grades dropped from a 3.0 to a 2.0. I was devastated, so I got help from my therapist and school administrators. Once we stopped going to school because of the coronavirus, it got a lot harder for me to get that face-to-face help that I needed.
In quarantine, you don't just lose being outside the house. You lose everything that goes with it.
You lose interactions with your friends, and you lose interactions with your family.
You're having to create what life looks like now.
Right now, we're trapped in the house until we go outside again. With grief, you're trapped in the feeling. You don't really know when it's going to end.
This pandemic changed the way I could grieve.
I found that to be a very powerful presentation, and I think a little disturbing and concerning if you have any sense of caring about our young people. Dr. Hancock, talk to us a little bit about children and their expression of grief and what you just heard.
I mean, it certainly is heartbreaking, and it really speaks to the different levels of loss that children are experiencing. They're experiencing loss of loved ones. They're experiencing loss of freedom. They're experiencing loss of routine, loss of relationship. And it's manifesting in a variety of ways. To Ms. Handel's point, the energy of grief can impact your health physiologically. I'm seeing children who are dealing more with stomach aches, headaches, and sometimes they're not really even understanding that certain levels of loss and grief are manifesting these symptoms. You know, when we think about children not being able to celebrate their senior year, and them not really feeling like they had permission to grieve that is a loss for them. I think it's important for us to create a safe space for them to be able to speak to it, and for us as adults to be sensitive to allowing them to grieve, whatever it is, whether it be the loss of a loved one or the loss of the ability to celebrate. And I really want to speak specifically on communities of color, where Blacks are over 3.5 times more likely to die from COVID. We're seeing in the African American and in the Latinx community, children losing loved ones at a disproportionate rate compared to their white counterparts, with lack of access to services. So I think about all of those things when I see this video.
And Dr. Hall Brown, if I also, reflect on some of the comments made about this notion of losing face-to-face engagement with their peers and their friends, that seems to have a very significant impact on young people.
Absolutely, particularly in the teens, they're very social beings. Everything that they do at school, some of their after school activities, all of that is connected with their peers. And by losing that, I think some of them feel like they've lost themselves. And so I've always advocated for finding creative ways to connect so that some of that loss can be channeled, in other directions. So perhaps creating game nights on Fridays with their friends or meeting up in a socially distanced manner. So they're still finding ways to connect, and that's one less loss that they may be experiencing. I have to say, at the end of that video, when they said inhale and exhale, I think that was so powerful. And I do think about that. We have to take a moment to think about how these children are feeling, what is going on, and then normalize those feelings because we're all feeling a lot of different things right now. And then help them to try to find ways to be productive and to channel some of that worry and anxiety so that it doesn't overwhelm them.
And Stephanie Handel, a bulk of your work is actually focused on just this issue of grief and children. What were your observations?
I have to start with recognizing and honoring every single one of those teens that actually just spoke. Really honoring the courage to share their losses, to share their experience of grief. What I'm struck by and what I was struck by in watching this again is just what looks like the heaviness that is sitting on their shoulders, their faces, of grief, of life, of navigating, what the language that was used about being trapped. I think about, kids that are surrounded by memories of loved ones who have died in their homes, literally feeling suffocated potentially by their grief. Normally, teens like to go out, go be with their peers, potentially even not come home as much, but go to be in other homes just to find a way to breathe through this a little bit. And I was really struck by just the heaviness that it looked like these young people were carrying on their faces and bodies.
Incredible. And as you said, very powerful. But I really like the idea that you are all expressing, which is to allow our children to be able to express how they feel and be a welcoming, embracing parent or adult to give it a safe space for those emotions, which are legitimate and reasonable, to be expressed, to allow them to occur and not to try to decide, make them go off into a side path, deny them or not to acknowledge them. And I think that's a challenge and an opportunity that all of us as adults have to be in service to the mental health of our children. Let's listen to another voice here, as we've got another one of our young people who has chosen to express their feeling in this area after having watched the film.
Hi. So one of the greatest things that I felt like I lost during this pandemic will have to be myself. Not only am I a social butterfly or extrovert, but over this time during the pandemic, I learned that when I'm not able to flourish, I kind of diminish. I haven't been able to feel myself or be myself, and now that I'm around people, it's kind of hard for me to connect with them like I used to.
I have to say that I'm struck by two things as a non-mental health professional about that young woman. Number one is the incredible level of articulateness and insight that she has about her own situation and the use of language to be able to express it so powerfully and so clearly. The second thing I thought that I was struck by, though, was what we in healthcare call affect, and a sense of a certain sadness that she allowed us to see in her. Dr. Hancock, how did you take that?
It certainly is heartbreaking because for our little ones, as Dr. Hellbrow mentioned, especially in adolescence, it is critical for them to be able to interact with their peers. And for someone who identifies themselves as a social butterfly, also, it's crippling not to be able to be who you truly are. And the loss of self, the loss of identity through the loss of connectedness in relationship, really, as I'm watching, I just wanted to hug her and let her know that we're going to do whatever we need to do to make sure that she's connected And it's something that hopefully her parent, her caregiver can connect with her on, given the fact that she is so well-spoken and how she feels lets me know that her parents, her caregivers have created a safe space for her to be able to feel the way that she feels.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, that she obviously is someone who is loved. She's someone who is cared about. She knows who she is, and she knows what she's lost. Didn't you get that same sense, Dr. Hall Brown?
Yes, absolutely. She was saying she wasn't worried about what was going on around her in the sense of, what her parents were doing for her, how she was connecting with them. It really was just this loss of connection with her peers, and how does she deal with that? As I saw her, I agree. Her affect and just her presentation really made you feel for her, because you got the sadness, that she was experiencing. So when I saw that, I was thinking, what other outlets could we help her with? What other ways could she get some of her, her wisdom and her energy out to the world? She seems like someone who would be able to perhaps write well and write out those feelings and try to deal with some of the loss that she's feeling in terms of, not connecting with her peers through other means. And that could be something that would help her in the long run.
Terrific. And finally, for Stephanie Handel, any last comment?
I think that I want to really validate what we just saw in this young woman. There's such a power in who she wants to be, and that sort of like being able to be with her, whether it's referring her to a teen group that's out there, connecting her with an online drama group, writing group, make those connections, because it's not reclaiming who she was prior to the pandemic, but helping her see who she wants to be and claim that person and start moving towards it. Because we see this tiny little smile that moves at one point across her face, and it lets us know that it's in there. It is in there. She wants to find it. She wants to get to it. And perhaps there are lots of adults that can help her get there.
I really love your reactions. And I think as we conclude this section and move to our final and third section, I think this really is the sense that you just want to hold your children. You just want to hold them and hug them and love them. It takes a village to raise a child. And I think the whole village has got to be moved towards take every child that you see and just hug them and show them our love and help them to understand how special they are, and then let them tell us how special they are, just like so many of the young people we've heard already. And we're about to meet a few more very special people. So here we go. Here's the next and last video segment that we want to talk about.
Now our homes are more than just our homes. They're hair salons, gyms, churches and temples, art studios, and classrooms.
April 14th.
First online classes today.
What does school look like during quarantine?
Now, I share my classroom with my siblings and my pets. And my classmates and my teachers see where I live.
My teachers aren't in the same room as me, so they can't help me in the same way. Does everybody have a device? An internet connection?
How many we're not having it. I recently have been having Wi-Fi issues, so it's hard to communicate with teachers. I'm late for everything because the internet in my house is so slow.
I was already 20 minutes late for my math class, and now I had to restart my computer. By the time I got to work again, I was 45 minutes late. Even then, the internet was still really slow and wouldn't work, so I just gave up.
You might be in the call, but you can't hear. You might get disconnected from the call, and that stresses you out because it happens to me repeatedly for some reason. We're not having enough information.
Now that teachers aren't in the same room as their classes, how does it change the way they interact with their students?
Hi, Autumn, it's so good to see you.
Hi, it's really good to see you too.
And so good to hear your voice. How have you been?
I've been good, but kind of iffy lately because of what's going on.
Yeah, I think we're all feeling that way. Well, welcome to class. We're going to get started soon. We're just waiting for a few other people to join us.
Okay.
Good morning, room 11. You are ornithology stars. Today, our bird, look at this, is the Philippine eagle. A classroom environment that helped them understand how to be awesome, terrific people. And so I try to compliment that a lot in the Zoom sessions. They like seeing me, they like seeing each other, they like being acknowledged. This is what good people do. Good people being anybody who shows respect for other people.
How does going to school remotely change the way students treat each other?
Before I even turned on my camera, a boy had read my name and decided to ask, "Who is this girl? Is she ugly?" After he said this, I was pretty hesitant to turn on my camera. I absolutely adored the way my hair looked, so I decided to turn on my camera anyways. Later on in the meeting, we got split up into breakout rooms.
That's a stupid headband.
The teacher wasn't there, so she didn't hear any of it. When we got back to the main meeting room, I told the teacher what had happened, but the other kids just scoffed. They found it funny. The teacher tried to stop them from being mean,
But they just talked over her.
She muted everyone.
But they held up mean messages to the camera.
I decided to keep my camera off and my microphone muted.
Well, there certainly were a lot of points made about isolation in that brief video clip, and I wonder, Dr. Hall Brown, as you listen to the very first young person present, saying, you know, my home has become everything for me. It's the hair salon, it's my school, it's where I completely exist almost. My little room. That's my world, and I feel very isolated. What struck you about his comments?
Just that I think that we're all in the same boat. I loved how it was articulated, all the different things that we're doing in this space. And, if we let it, we can kind of find ourselves in a rut of just being in a room all day and really not seeing anyone else in our household. I've often advocated to my patients to try to maybe, change locations, because it does help with our mental capacity, and just helping us to not get caught up in being in one space all day. And it can be difficult. I mean, we have technology differences. We have all kinds of different things that impact our ability to do this virtual learning and to do well in this virtual space. And I think these students, in the video, were really articulating well, what we're all going through right now.
Yeah, Stephanie Handel, as you sort of observed, what were the impressions that struck you the most?
A number of things. The first thing that jumped out to me were these two adults, the teachers, that really were trying to convey a sense of connectivity, a sense of hope, a sense of grounding to their students. Clearly, their students were getting a chance to see parts of their home or their backyards. And these adults really were trying to connect. And I think about, what does it mean to only have access to our friends and other adults through a screen, and how lonely it can feel in our space. And literally, our facial affect can change everything. How open we sit can make a young person feel so much more comfortable. I'm struck by that teens, their rooms are their havens, most of them. It's where they go play their music. They can hide away. They can be angry. They can be happy. They can be sad. And now everything is happening in their rooms. And I do worry, and I get concerned at times, that their room has lost that sense of being a place that really can ground them and make them feel safe. And how do we help young people be really creative, even if they live in a house that has 6, 7 people? How do you find little spaces inside your apartment, outside your house, in a corridor, just to be able to ground yourself a little bit, to manage these days of being so isolated and not connected to your friends?
Dr. Hancock, that is a very important point, and I think you sort of talked earlier, about the sense of loss and grief that so many African American children are feeling because of the preponderance of deaths that the African American community is experiencing. One of the reasons that we, as people of color, are experiencing such a difficult challenge from the COVID pandemic has been that we are living in congregated ways. We are densely living up upon each other. And I wonder how you sort of see that as being an even more challenging part of what's being expressed by these young people.
Right. I think it's important for us to really spend a little bit of time talking about the experience of children of color in this pandemic. As I mentioned before, Blacks are over 3.5 times more likely to die from COVID. Latinx communities over 2.5 times more likely to die from COVID. When their parents are the frontline workers, when Black and Brown communities, 75% of us do not have an option for telework. Our children are watching us go to work. My daughter, at the peak of the pandemic, was in a panic every single day that I had to go out and see patients. And I'm talking parents who work at the grocery store, who are police officers, bus drivers, etc. So I think there has to be a special place created for our children of color to really speak to the information that they're hearing in the news about them being more likely to acquire and die from COVID. And the fact that communities of color have less access to mental health professionals, further strengthening this sense of isolation. When I remember growing up as a Black girl and hearing all these bad health statistics around Black communities and feeling just frightened by what the outcome would be for me. And certainly when you hear that information and you see situations like the murder of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, in addition to the pandemic that we're experiencing in terms of COVID, I call it a triple pandemic. It's an economic pandemic, it's a racial injustice pandemic, and it's an infectious disease pandemic that's disproportionately impacting Black and Brown communities. And our children have not been given that space to be able to communicate specifically their concerns and feel very, very isolated, especially when it comes to conversations around race, when you are dismantling their ability to socially connect with their teachers, with their peers, with their support systems, and then they're left to think through all of these issues that we are dealt with. I can only imagine being an adolescent in 2020 right now.
That was a very important point, Dr. Hancock. And I think not only should we be celebrating the young people, but certainly celebrating the parents. This is a very difficult time to be a parent, and certainly to be a parent of African-American children or children of any color. This is tough, and I think we need to embrace you, every one of the parents that are listening to this show, and thank you for what you are doing, and acknowledge that this ain't easy. And the fact that you're doing your best, you're watching this show, you're talking to others to find ways in which you can do your job best to protect your child and help them to grow, you should be commended, and our hearts go out to you. We have one more student reactor who, in watching the full film, felt compelled to share these thoughts with us.
COVID-19 has had its ups and its downs. It's been really hard not being able to see my friends from school. But what's worse is not being able to see my grandpa. He was recently diagnosed with cancer, and because of his compromised immune system, my family isn't allowed to visit him as often as we'd like to. It's been really hard not having a support system always around me, but I hope things get better with him and with the world. Bye, you guys.
Once again, Stephanie Handel, I'm amazed by the honesty, the painful honesty, and yet then the reaction, the sense of optimism and hope that she expressed. I don't know, what did you get from that?
Yeah, I felt the importance of this relationship that she has with her grandparent, and a bit of the fear that, she wants to have the connection. She wants to be able to be reassured. She wants to connect with her grandparent, whether it's to express love, to make sure that grandparent is doing okay. It goes both ways, and it speaks to relationships and how COVID, this is one thing that COVID has sort of robbed us of, just being able to move in and out of these really important relationships. And this young woman, it just sort of oozes out of her how much she just wants to connect with the grandparent, reassured that he's okay, and also to reassure him that she's okay. Just make that connection. And those rituals, whether it's, you know, while someone is sick or after someone has died, those rituals provide a sense of groundedness. It's a structure that allows us to be with the experience in a very concentrated, structured way. Being able to say goodbye, or the ritual of being able to say goodbye, has positive impact on the mental health of an individual after a death. The supports that an individual has when someone is dying or after death has a positive impact on how a young person, you know, successfully navigates mental health. And so when I hear her, I think about the importance of what she wants and what we can also creatively help her find ways to connect.
Well, that's beautiful. And it certainly reminded me also of the piece of the film we saw in our first segment with the young student from Howard University who talked about just not being able to mourn her grandparent that she lost, and having to do it by herself. And so this sense of isolation. Let me, as we start to think about closing out this experience, one of the things that we have been trying to do, and hopefully others will be able to model then, is being able to have our young people present how they feel and do it in a trusting way, and then be able as adults to listen to that and embrace it, honor it, and then provide some either positive feelings or positive thoughts of how to handle it. Let me start with you, Dr. Hancock, and sort of understand sort of things that we as parents and adults can do to try to help our kids to get through this difficult time.
I think the first thing to do is to ask them how they're doing, and not the generic, how are you today? I actually, as a mom and as a pediatrician, what I counsel my families to do is go back to sort of basic science on a scale of 1 to 10. How are you feeling? And when they give that number, why is it a 10? Why is it a 1? My daughter, even now, I ask, what was the highlight of your day and what was the challenge of your day? And, you know, watching that young lady's video made me tear up. I'm glad you didn't go to me first, because I think about the question that my daughter asked me. My grandmother turned 90 this year. And my daughter asked me, am I going to get to see mother before she dies? And so it's being able to explore where that question came from, and to try my best to reassure her that, God willing, mother will be here by the time we're able to travel. And I find it interesting that we use the term social distance when we talk about 6 feet of separation, and it isn't social distancing. It should be interpersonal space distancing. But when you hear social distancing, to me, it means I can't hug my grandmother. I can't go see her, and it's frustrating. And so I think it's important for us to show our own emotion so that our children are comfortable in demonstrating theirs.
I'm so glad you did. And I'm so glad you just gave permission to parents all across the region to do the same. And that's a great service. Thank you. Dr. Hall-Brown, your thoughts on how we can help our kids get through this?
Yeah, I would say try to help them maintain some structure. The uncertainty makes it really difficult for all of us to function at times, really, if I have to say it specifically. So I would say that if we can help them maintain structure, which is helping them to still get, you know, appropriate amounts of sleep, help them to exercise, help them to, do their academic homework and participate in their academic studies, I think that that'll go a long way. There's so much that we're dealing with the anxiety, the isolation, the loss. But I think if we can maintain that structure and support them as much as possible, that our children will be able to be successful and we'll get through these challenges.
Thank you. And we have 30 seconds left. Stephanie Handel, you've given so many other tips as to how to help our young people. What is your tip for helping adults?
Helping you threw me there. For helping adults, whatever you can do, the same thing that we're talking about with kids, notice what your experience is. Really validate, I'm having an experience. Don't try and pretend it's not there. Get support. Work to do anything to regulate yourself, whether that's movement. We're talking about lots and lots of movement. Breathing exercises, connecting with someone else, not just the person in your head, but really reaching out via phone, via Zoom, so that you can be in conversations with other parents, other teachers, other adults, just to get some normalization. through this, me as an adult, we model for our young people. We need to reassure them. And when we're not doing okay, that's okay, but we also do not want to put that onto our young people. So let's do our work, notice what's happening, validate ourselves, and really take care of ourselves in it as well.
Unfortunately, our time is limited. However, if you wish to view the original film in its entirety, please go to arenastage.org or to blackcoalitionagainstcovid.org. I want to thank our guests, Stephanie Handel, Dr. Yolandra Hancock, and Dr. Tyish Hall-Brown, for sharing their wisdom and their expertise with us. We also want to thank all the student collaborators who contributed to this project, as well as everyone involved from Arena Stage and WHUR 96.3 FM radio and WHUT Howard University Television. We also want to remind you that there are resources within the community where you can get more information about this important topic. That information can be found at the Black Coalition website, blackcoalitionagainstcovid.org. Thank you so much for watching this program. Good night.
How do we comfort each other?
1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
How do we comfort our communities from a distance?
How do we help each other find hope?